Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Want to talk about High Score, the brand new documentary on Netflix. Now, if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you very much. So High Score, so far there are 6 episodes. It's a 6-episode series, and I absolutely love the first episode, which I want to talk to you guys a little bit about today. And I'll definitely watch the next 5, probably when I'm through with this video, because I really enjoyed it quite a bit. Now, interestingly, High Score doesn't start, it talks about video game history, retro gaming and that kind of thing, but it doesn't start at the beginning. So there's no Willie Higginbotham and his Tennis for Two. There's no Ralph Baer and his Magnavox Odyssey. There's no Pong, Computer Space, no Steve Russell, none of that stuff. I think the producers in Netflix purposely wanted to start off with a sexier topic, something a lot more people know about, and they do begin with E.T. for the Atari 2600, and I almost rolled my eyes at the beginning and thought, oh no, not more E.T. You know, there's been a documentary about that, there's been a lot of articles about that, we all know about E.T., how awful it was and all that kind of thing, and Howard Scott Warshaw, the creator of E.T., he's at the beginning of the episode, and he pokes fun at that a little bit about it being an awful game, and alludes to the video game crash a little bit and all that kind of thing. And then the episode is bookended nicely with Howard Scott Warshaw talking again at the end of the episode about E.T. He talks about meeting Steven Spielberg and everything, and it's actually pretty interesting. So it's all good. And, I don't blame them. They want to start off with something everybody knows about, and some topic, for some reason, E.T. just, everybody loves that, and you just say E.T. for the Atari 2600 and you get giggles, even by people that hardly know anything about video games. So anyway, that drew everybody in to this episode. So after the E.T. segment, they get to Space Invaders, the legendary arcade classic from 1978. Just an incredible game that I discovered when it came out. I remember just being blown away by these, scary invaders coming down the screen, these advancing, imposing sound effects, and the invaders would get faster. It was actually a scary game for the time, and I absolutely loved it. And they talk about, so they interview Tomohiro Nishikado, the creator of Space Invaders, and he gives a really good interview. It's really interesting. He talks about how Space Invaders was primarily influenced by 3 things, and these just happen to be 3 of my favorite things. War of the Worlds. This is my original copy of War of the Worlds from when I was a kid that I got through the Scholastic Book Club in elementary school. Love H.G. Wells to this day. Big fan of The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, and on and on. Great stuff. So it's really cool that Space Invaders was influenced by that. The creature designs were influenced by the aliens in War of the Worlds. Space Invaders was also influenced by Breakout, the video game from 1976, the arcade classic, that made me think, hey, I think I like video games even more than my beloved pinball. So Space Invaders was also influenced by Star Wars. I saw Star Wars at the theater in 1977 when I was 10. Another thing that's one of my all-time favorites, one of my favorite movies of all time. So with that trifecta, how could I not absolutely love Space Invaders? And Mr. Nishikado goes on to talk about, the design of Space Invaders and how he actually shows off his original notebook that he still has, in his archives, and he flips through it and shows you his original character sketches, sort of these aquatic creatures like, octopi and whatnot. He shows those off, and he shows what would become of these with 8-bit renderings as well. Really, really cool. And the documentary goes on to talk about how Space Invaders was so freaking popular in the arcades that in Japan they started calling arcades invader houses. That's how freaking popular it was. And then there's an interview with Rebecca Heinemann, who won a Space Invaders tournament in 1980, the Atari National Video Game Championships. Really cool. In 1980, when I was 13, I had no idea there were, these national video game tournaments, and so it's really fascinating today to learn more about these things. And Rebecca was Bill Heinemann back in the day. Rebecca's a transgender woman, and she talks about how video games really influenced her, and just how video games were a safe space. She says the video games virtual world were the only place she could find solace and peace, because obviously the LGBTQ plus community in the 1980s were not accepted nearly as well as they are today, not even close. And so that was really interesting and inspiring to hear her talk, and just how great she was at Space Invaders. And she talks about something that really interesting that happened during the tournament. as far as it lasted almost 2 hours, and they just had to stop it because the players were just so good at it. They just stopped it and awarded her with the victory. Really cool, and there's some footage of that. And throughout this episode, there's early video game commercials and news footage and all that kind of stuff. Really, really cool, really interesting. So they talk about, they show early footage of gamers talking about how they can play like Asteroids on 1/4 for 31 hours. I had no idea other people could do that, because back in the day, I discovered how to do that. I was playing at my little convenience store near my house, and I got so good at Asteroids. One time I closed that place down. I was playing for 4.5 hours on 1/4, and they had to kick me out because the store was closing. I didn't know these tournaments and high score competitions and everything were going on. I just knew about, gaming against my friends and at school, and, in the local arcades and in my neighborhood and everything. So it's always cool to learn about, early competitive arcade history, even that predates the Twin Galaxies era. They go into a deep dive on the company that made the small three-man company that made the Missile Command enhancement kits that led to the Atari lawsuit, and then the creation of Miss Pac-Man. Really, this show, since it's 6 episodes, and since they can cover specific topics, give a lot of good time for that, you get some really good deep dives. So that's awesome. Then they interview Toru. I'm terrible with Japanese, so bear with me. Toru Iwatani, who created Pac-Man, and he talks about how he created Pac-Man specifically to appeal to women. And yes, he does talk about how the character design of Pac-Man was created when he was eating pizza, how they took when he took the slice out, the remaining pizza looked like, what would become Pac-Man. Now, over the years, a lot of people have said that that's just mythology, and then that's not true. But the creator of Pac-Man says it. So is he touting this mythology as real, or is that how it really happened? Whatever the case, he does say that's what happened. Now, he says, also Mr. Iwatani says he kept Pac-Man simple with no eyes or no nose as a symbol. And what I didn't know is he talks about how he was surprised it was so successful in America. He knew it would be successful in Japan. He had a good hunch, but he had no idea, Pac-Mania would take over the U.S., so that was pretty neat. Then they interview Nolan Bushnell. Now, they call him the creator of Atari, not the co-creator of Atari. They completely ignore Ted Dabney, as often is the case. Nolan Bushnell is just such a more prominent figure and so much more well-known. And like so many writings and documentaries and things, they call Nolan Bushnell the sole creator of Atari. Don't mention Ted Dabney, so that's kind of a bummer. But this next segment makes up for it. They interview Jerry Lawson's son. Now, those of you really hardcore retro gamers may know Jerry Lawson as the creator of the Fairchild Channel F, and he was an African-American at a time when there weren't many at all African-Americans creating video games. He was a 6'6" black guy in Silicon Valley, and that was just not a typical sight, and they talk about that, and they talk about family members. And there's one kind of silly part where they show a couple of Lawson's family members blowing in a Fairchild Channel F cartridge. I thought that was a little silly, but oh well. I'll take a little hokiness along the way, because it was really, really cool to hear, for a mainstream audience like a Netflix crowd, to hear about Jerry Lawson and the awesome invention that he invented, the cartridge-based console. That would accept cartridges. That came out in 1976, that predated the Atari 2600 by a year. Came out the year before in 76, so that's really cool to put a spotlight on Mr. Lawson and the awesome, and when I was in 1976, I distinctly remember the Fairchild Channel F. My two best friends each had a Fairchild Channel F system. One lived next door to me, and one lived, half a mile down the street, so I'm very familiar with the Fairchild Channel F. Love it, and it's always cool for Jerry Lawson's name to get out there and be public. That is awesome. They talk about how when the Atari 2600 came out, it was just so popular that Lawson's story in the Fairchild Channel F was just lost to history. So that's kind of sad in that respect. And then they circle back around to Howard Scott Warshaw about meeting Steven Spielberg, and how Spielberg said, he showed the game, talked to Spielberg about his idea for the game, and Spielberg said, why not just make a Pac-Man clone? And Howard Scott, he's like, your movie, you know, E.T. is just too great of a movie. That would be a disservice to how great that movie is to just make a Pac-Man clone. And so Spielberg ultimately accepted the idea, and the rest is video game history. Now there's 5 more episodes that I mentioned. Like I said, they're gonna do one on Nintendo, one on RPGs, there's a Sega Genesis episode, one about fighting games, which arose to prominence in the early 90s, and 3D games. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you've watched High Score, let me know in the comments, what did you think of, if you've just watched the first episode, let me know what you think about that, or just let me know what you think about the series as a whole. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for hitting that like button. Thank you for subscribing. We will talk to you later.